Hello and welcome to Game Changer Live. We were created to inspire with topics around positivity, coaching, and overcoming perfectionism, among others. And we endeavor to bring the most authentic and unedited content that you can get. And that's why we go live, so that who you see here is who you would actually get to go to work with. Our shows air every Wednesday at 3:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, and we bring on occasional guests. Our motto for this channel is Together We Inspire. So let's go ahead and get inspired today. My name is Daniel Connor. I'm a certified professional coach. I'm a leader in my local chapter of the International Coaching Federation. I'm an energy leadership master practitioner. I'm the owner of Connor's Coaching, and I'm the host of Game Changer Live. And perfection, in my opinion, is the worst. We hold ourselves back or pretend to be someone that we're not just to impress someone else or control our futures. Well, my clients learn to overcome it. My clients learn to change from the inside out, and instead of holding themselves back, they may make progress and produce results. Rather than spending all of their time pretending to be someone that they're not to impress people who don't actually matter, they learn to define who they want to be, to attract who they want to attract, and they wake up feeling satisfied with the person reflected in the mirror. Today, we're talking about crisis and what happens to perfectionism when we experience crisis. And as a disclaimer, crisis is a loaded term, and oftentimes what comes with crisis is some form of trauma, PTSD, or some other form. And I am not a mental health professional. I want to be clear. The analogy that we like to use on this channel is that you have a doctor and a physical therapist and a physical trainer at the gym. The doctor and the physical therapist are there to help you when you're injured, when you're having a problem, having a problem. But your physical trainer at the gym, they're there to help make sure that that doesn't happen. So we're healthier and we're better. Coach, like me, is more like the physical trainer that you would see at a gym, and we can help prevent mental illness by creating mindfulness, by creating standards, and by practicing in that space of kind of the positive side of psychology, giving you life skills that are necessary and improving your mindset, if you will. Whereas there are forms of illness that need to be treated by a mental wellness practitioner, a mental therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist. There's no shame in it. In fact, I think that every human being on earth at some point of time or another should embrace therapy. And there are tons of resources out there, such as BetterHelp. Your health insurance should have a list of therapists that are available for you. And I want to encourage you. There are also crisis helplines out there with qualified therapists attached to them. And I want to encourage you that if you are experiencing any form of crisis in the present, that you seek qualified help to help you overcome that crisis. That said, um, I I am a perfectionist and I've experienced multiple crises personally. I also am a coach that helps people who are perfectionists to overcome that perfection, and I have seen them talk about past crises that they've experienced and how they handled it, which has led me to create some observations. So I'm going to be making some generalizations today about crisis that are based on my real world experience. And I want everyone to keep in mind that everyone experiences crisis differently. What is a crisis to one person might not be a crisis to another person. And so these are generalizations that I'm talking about today. And this is basically my disclaimer. My hope in presenting this today is that perfectionists out there are more prepared and self-aware when a crisis eventually does show up, and that they can learn some steps and take some kind of inventory of their skill sets now, so that when they find that next crisis down the road, because they are unavoidable, they're prepared, they're ready for it, and they can face it with open eyes. So first of all, so that was my disclaimer. So first of all, um, here's the good stuff. Perfectionists specifically oftentimes turn to perfectionism as the result of some form of past crisis or trauma, in my experience. Oftentimes, the entire point of perfectionism is to avoid a future crisis situation. We're afraid of being turned down by the wrong person, or we're afraid of negative criticism or negative feedback. And so we are imminently preparing for crisis at all times. That's one of the signifiers to me of what perfectionists look like. But not every crisis is the same, and some of them perfectionists are really good at, and others not so much. So I want to take a second to draw some buckets around different types of crisis that could occur in someone's life that will help us identify which ones perfectionists like myself, probably like you, because I think a lot of people out there are perfectionists. Um, that when we face these kinds of crises, we know what we're good at and we know what we're not good at. So the big buckets that I want to draw are physical, mental, and emotional. Another way of looking at that is body, heart, and mind, right? So the physical crises are the immediate physical threats that are around you: an accident, a fire, an injury, being held at gunpoint. These types of crises, honestly, are the ones that perfectionists tend to be incredibly good at because they need quick, decisive action and a variety of other things that lend themselves well to what perfectionists are good at. And one of the reasons for perfectionists being really good at this type of crisis, at the physical type of crisis, is that we've been preparing for them our entire lives. We think about them all the time. We're a little bit paranoid when it comes to potential traffic accidents or things that could happen or fires. I have a go kit in my closet that I need to dust off. um, so physical crises are ones that we tend to be fairly good at surviving. That doesn't mean that we're going to, but we tend to be pretty good at it. Um, the next bucket that I want to point out is the emotional crisis. This would be anxiety, thoughts of self-harm, grief specifically. And perfectionists, I think, like every human being, are kind of a mixed bag with this type of emotional crisis. This largely depends on probably the root cause of why we've turned to perfectionism in the first place. For me, I handle emotional crisis pretty well. In fact, I would say I would give myself an A plus in emotional crisis. But not every perfectionist is going to experience it that way. And it's important to know where you fall on handling emotional crisis, where you fall on handling grief or anxiety or depression, because every human being is going to face one of these forms of crisis at some point or another. Whether or not you get into an accident or an injury or fire, it's pretty likely that one of those is going to happen in some point in your life. But emotional crisis is 100% guaranteed. It's tied to the human condition. And this is why having a mental health professional in your corner, in your pocketbook, is so important, because it's unavoidable. The final bucket really is the bucket that unfortunately perfectionism is not great at dealing with. And that would be mental crisis. This is excess stress, overwhelm, a loss of personal identity, facing a change or challenge or a situation, such as retiring from work or having a new baby or getting married, a change of your identity. These types of mental stresses um, can lead to mental crisis. And perfectionists oftentimes face an uphill battle with mental crisis because that's the type of crisis we create. We create excess stress. We create excess overwhelm. We identify and plan for making change without really honestly preparing for that change. And so, oftentimes, because of this, perfectionism is the source of a crisis from happening. And so, by being aware of which of these buckets you're going to be facing in the future, hopefully you can get a little bit more prepared. And when that crisis comes up, you know, hey, you know what? This is going to be some mental crisis, and I probably need some help with this one. So let's talk about some of the skills of perfectionism that help us survive different types of stress and sometimes even thrive in those crisis moments. So I'm going to give you a list of 5 strengths that I see for perfectionists, and then we're going to talk a little, just real briefly about each of them. So here are the 5 strengths that perfectionists use to survive crisis. Um, High expectations and standards, quality work, focusing on achieving goals and a sense of accomplishment, a strength of endurance, and attention to detail. So, uh, just to break those down a little bit, the first one was high standards and expectations. These are kind of the name of the game during a crisis for us, because what happens in my experience is that we have these high expectations we set for ourselves, these high standards that we set for other people, and these help us navigate our daily life to prevent crisis down the road. But when a crisis happens, these transform like little butterflies, and what they become are new rules that we can use to make quick decisions. I don't know that I can give a really good example of this one, but basically, what happens is the walls start closing in on our options during a crisis, during a stressful period, but we're able to keep moving forward as a result of having these high expectations. These high expectations and high standards really help us survive physical crisis and sometimes, oftentimes, emotional crisis as well. Not so great at mental, because with mental crisis, there's a lot of clutter in that area, a lot of roadblocks that are created. Sometimes our high expectations and standards actually become a problem. So we'll talk a little bit about the drawbacks in a little bit. The next one, quality of work, was the second one that I mentioned. And this is because we're so committed to producing high quality work, we actually benefit from doing things right the first time. Um, and we know that what we do is going to be accurate or correct. And this is great during physical types of stress, because if you're diffusing a bomb, you know which wire to cut. And once you've cut that wire, you know you did it correctly. This type of quality work really enables it to move forward. And it goes kind of to the fifth point. I'm going to do this a little out of order. The fifth point was attention to detail. Again, this is beneficial in situations that require high accuracy and a degree of precision. Again, if there's a bomb in my house, I'm going to want a perfectionist to disarm that bomb, because they're going to be the best at it. I know that I can trust them. I'm not a bomb expert, by the way. So the last two, that points number 3 and 4, were focusing on achieving and a sense of accomplishment. Perfectionists get things done in a crisis because there's no needing for deep analysis or waiting or thinking. That's why again, the mental one is a problem. But when we're facing physical or emotional crisis, it tends to be something that we can focus on the next step, the next achievement, the next moving forward. And then finally, the fourth point, out of order, was endurance. And this is a type of resilience that helps us persist. We hear the word resilience a lot, and resilience is basically our ability to survive, our ability to bounce back, our ability to persist through difficult times. Endurance is a type of resilience that helps us take difficult tasks over a long period of time. And because of our attention to detail, our endless editing and endless work to create a perfect product that we're satisfied with, we actually have extra amounts of endurance as opposed to non-perfectionists. We have larger attention spans. We can stick with it. We can stay up all night when we need to handle one of those crisis moments. And so this is a type of resilience that actually lends itself well to all forms of crisis. And resiliency in and of itself isn't just one skill set. There's a lot that goes into resiliency. And so recognizing our strengths of endurance as a form of resiliency can really help us have faith and feel secure that we're moving forward in the right direction. So those are some of the strengths, but it's not all good news. As I mentioned, and as we've talked about on this channel, every strength is also a weakness. There are personality traits out there that lend themselves really well to going out and meeting people, but might lend themselves poorly to being alone, for example. Um, when we rely really heavily on our strengths, we oftentimes find that there are holes in our plan. So here are some of the weaknesses that are created with perfectionism. The first one that I want to talk about is analysis paralysis. And as we go through this list, you're really going to see that this is all mental stress, all mental crisis. The mental crisis that we face, the excess stress, the overwhelm, the anxiety, facing endless amounts of change or disruption of the status quo, those kinds of, and a loss of identity, those kinds of stresses, you're going to see why they become such a difficult uphill battle as we go through this list of weaknesses. And I hate the word weaknesses because it makes it seem like there's something fundamentally wrong or flawed. I would say that these are the opposite of strengths. These are things we're not good at and not necessarily things that we're flawed over. So, uh, and again, these are mostly going to fall in the line of the emotional, of the mental category of crisis. Analysis paralysis is the first one. Excess stress is the second. A lack of flexibility is the third. And a fear of choice or outcome is the fourth. So the first one, analysis by paralysis. This is where we have so many options facing us, so many decisions, and it's too much for our brain to process all the potential outcomes so that we can pick the best one. In fact, if we had to weigh them out, they're all relatively even, and there's 6 of them. So which of them are we supposed to choose? Do we call this person? Do we call this person? Who do we call? So analysis paralysis is one of those issues that perfectionists tend to face with mental stress. And so, for example, a crisis might be you have too many things to do at work, right? That your inbox is flooded with, I need this right now, and you don't know which of those projects to work on. This type of analysis paralysis can actually lead itself down to more stress down the road because we're not simply doing one thing, which we're really good at doing one thing at a time, not multiple things at a time. And instead, we're sitting there trying to figure out which direction to go. The second one is excess stress, and perfectionists are really good at creating extra stress for ourselves. And this goes back to our high expectations. We create higher expectations and higher standards for ourselves. And so as a result, we face more stress, stress that is not warranted necessarily. During a crisis, this excess stress might actually transform itself from mental or emotional stress into mental stress. Sorry, from physical or emotional stress into mental stress. So take, for example, that this is going to be a weird example, but it should outline kind of how perfectionists might think about things. Um, you're in a fire and you're running out of your house and you're passing your fireplace, and on your fireplace are some family heirlooms, but you can only take one. You put this excess stress on yourself that you're going to save the one that's the most important rather than just blindly picking one of them and moving on and being glad that you picked that one. So a non-perfectionist is just going to pick one. But a perfectionist is going to struggle with that choice and feel or create doubt for themselves or create extra stress down the road that they picked the wrong one or that the other ones are somehow valuable. Rather than cherishing the one thing that they saved, they're going to lament the things that they didn't save. And this creates excess stress. So during this crisis, we can actually create excess stress or create more for ourselves than we need to. Another example of this is I had a client, this is actually a real example. I had a client who was behind on a deadline. She had to get a project out to someone who needed it, and she said that she was going to get it done by Friday, and here it is Tuesday the next week, and she still hasn't done it. And when we were looking at the project, she had added all of these extra criteria to the project. If she hadn't added all these, she wanted to do a video for it, she wanted to do a worksheet for it, she wanted to do all this other stuff to impress the client. When the client would have been happy with the original results that she wanted to deliver, which was just a workshop. But instead, she created all of this extra stress for herself so that it created a new crisis. She was already in a crisis because it was late. Now she's in an additional crisis because there's all this extra work for herself due to her high expectations, due to her need to please someone else, due to her need to impress. So as you can see from this, because we have high expectations, perfectionists are really good at creating new forms of crisis for ourselves. The third point was lack of flexibility. And this goes back to our high expectations again. And because we spend so much time creating high expectations, we oftentimes create personal roadblocks for reasonable solutions because they just don't fit our worldview. Again, going back to that last example, there's a lack of flexibility there that we're behind on the deadline and we had these extra expectations that we added on. And rather than being okay with the original result, we created these extra things and we just couldn't see the option of cutting them out, not doing those things. This is a serious drawback when our problem solving skills are crucial because it limits the amount of things that we can come up with. So when we're doing brainstorming, usually what we do is we don't say no to anything. We just say all of the different options that are on the table. But for perfectionists, we've already eliminated some of those options. And so we can't consider them during a time of crisis because they're already off of the table. We've already eliminated that option. So the lack of flexibility that we have tends to lend itself more towards creating additional stress. And then the final one was a fear of choice or a fear of outcome. Now, everyone fears change. And the reason we fear change is because human beings are afraid of the unknown. Human beings are afraid of the dark. We're afraid of whatever is outside of our cave beyond the light of our fire. We fill that space with all sorts of monsters and problems. And perfectionists are really good at doing this because we catastrophize all of the different possible outcomes so that we can pick the one that has the least catastrophe. Again, makes us really resilient in the face of physical crisis, but also creates extra stress and can create its own mental crises. Sometimes crisis requires a leap of faith to just pick a decision, even if it's not the right one, because inaction is unacceptable. But perfectionism doesn't lend itself well to just picking one at random. The eeny, meeny, miny, mo doesn't work real well for perfectionists. And yet, sometimes that's the only way to get through a crisis. Sometimes that's the only way to get through the multiple emails all demanding your attention right this second is an eeny, meeny, miny, mo. A random choice that is just a leap of faith. And so those are a list of some of the weaknesses or drawbacks of perfectionism when we face crisis. And while being a perfectionist does have its advantages. I want to iterate that it comes with some significant drawbacks and can even create additional crisis. Being aware of both of our strengths and our weaknesses can really help us be better prepared and to create some reasonable solutions that can help us move forward. So, for the last little bit of my show today, I want to talk about some real practical tips. And this is going to be just a quick list of things that we can do. If you want to learn more about these lists, feel free to reach out to me, email me, go to my website, set up an appointment, talk to them about me, or talk to me about them. But my goal here is that I will inspire you to do your own research of what you could do to help prepare for crisis. So this is a list for perfectionists to help them uh, prepare for a potential crisis without creating a new one. The first one is to practice realistic expectations. This is really about defining achievable goals and outcomes for yourself. The second one is to compartmentalize tasks into chunks. Rather than focusing on the outcome of any situation, focus on the next milestone and what you need to do to get there. If you're leaving a burning building, focus on going from the bedroom to the hallway to the front room to the door and then out to the outside, instead of focusing on just going from the bedroom to the outside, because that can feel like a monumental task when you're in the middle of a fire, whereas getting into the hallway, getting into the next room, and moving forward, inching your way forward, will help you maintain momentum. One of the ways that I like to look at this is the analogy of the steam engine. It takes a lot of energy to get a steam engine to move once it's stopped. It takes a lot less energy if that steam engine stays in motion. If you think about it, this is like keeping the energy, the train moving, keeping the train in motion. If you go from one milestone to the next milestone to the next milestone, it's like chugging along on the engine, so your wheel is going around. And so that's enough about that one. Let's move on to the third point. Acknowledging that many factors are simply outside of your control. And if you want to know more about this one, check out my episode from 2 weeks ago. It was all about controlling the uncontrollable. And that really can help us be more aware of where we can take action and what we can eliminate out of our life because it's just creating undue stress. Speaking of, we talk a little bit about stress in on this show as one of many things that pull from the same resources. So pain, stress, emotion, hunger, exhaustion, all come from the same pool of resources, our limited energy as a human being. So if we prioritize our self-care, exercising, mindfulness, adequate sleep can help us reduce the amount of stress that we experience in those areas of our life so that we have more resources to handle the bigger stresses that we can't avoid or can't prevent or can't do anything about. So make sure that you're at the top of your game on a physical, emotional, and mental level through sleep, exercise, and feeding yourself well, mindfulness, that kind of thing. It can have a benefit of helping reduce unnecessary stress so that when the actual necessary stress shows up, you're ready to deal with it. And on the same kind of level, create healthy coping mechanisms for yourself, like deep breathing, meditating, journaling, praying, uh, having some form of creative expression or outlet like writing or painting. Those can also help reduce the emotional stresses that can happen. Um, keep going on this list. I have 3 more to go. Setting healthy boundaries by saying no can help also reduce the amount of stress that we're going to experience and free up some energy for when we need it the most. Planning on professional help. I cannot emphasize this enough. If you are injured, if you are hurting, if you're emotionally hurting and you need to talk to someone, talk to someone. talk to a mental health professional, talk to a doctor, have a list of numbers that you can rely on, crisis helplines that you can rely on in a future crisis. They could save your life. And finally, biggest one, number one thing that you can do as a perfectionist to help you prepare for and survive a crisis: don't be focused on the future or too focused on the future. It's perfectly normal to prepare, to have exercise, to make sure that you're ready. But it's also important to remember that trying to control the future is like trying to control the impossible. It may cause some additional stress, and you want to save up those reserves. If you want to work on your perfectionism and create a new resiliency in how you handle potential future crisis, consider hiring a coach like me. I'm taking new clients right now, and I would love to give you a free 30-minute period of time where we just talk on Zoom, not in person, on Zoom, just to discover whether or not coaching is right for you and I'm the right coach for you. Because fit is the primary important criteria for a good coach. Head over to connerscoaching.com. That's CONNERS coaching.com, and you'll see a book me page. You can book a free 30-minute appointment with me, and we'll discover whether or not coaching is right for you, whether I'm the right coach for you, and we will book that initial consultation today. I want to thank you so much for being part of my show today, for listening to me talk about my experience as a perfectionist overcoming crisis. And if you wouldn't mind just giving back to the community a little bit today by liking this video specifically, subscribing to our channel so that you get more content, and sharing this with someone else who might want to prepare for crisis down the road. I'll see you next week at 3:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Again, that's every Wednesday at 3:30 Pacific Standard Time. We're here. And next week, we have a guest who's going to be talking with us about hypnosis, and I'm deeply fascinated about her topic. So I'm really excited for that episode. I'll see you then. Until then, bye.